Hello and welcome back to the Jackverse. I am here with author Adam Oster, the author of The Legend of Buddy Hero. This book is included in the Storybundle Superbundle, which you can get right now until, I believe, the end of the month. Maybe not even till then.
I think we got like 9 days, 8
9
days.
days left, yeah. It's an exciting bundle that we put together, and I was really pleased to include Adam's book. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. So let me just jump right in. Describe The Legend of Buddy Hero to someone who has never even bothered to look at a superhero book.
Sure. When I started with The Legend of Buddy Hero, I really wanted to try something that was a little bit more of an easy reader for an adult. A lot of adult literature is a little bit heavier for the entry level reader, and so I kind of took the roadmap of a young adult novel. So you have the person who gets introduced to this magical world, or in this case, the world of superheroes, and finds out that they're kind of a big deal in some way, and kind of took that to a more adult theme. And so in this situation, you have the main character, who's Buddy Jackson, or Buddy Hero, who is this guy who he's in his middle age, about middle age. He doesn't really have much for prospects for life. He had this life that he wishes he still had, but the twist here is that he was at one point the world's greatest superhero, but he has no clue because of this worldwide mind wipe, where basically everyone's minds got erased, or that changed. The memories of the history of the world got changed. Not even he is aware that he at one point was a superhero who had these superpowers. They were taken from him through this same process. And so he's then introduced through a series of events to this world that once was, that happened on our Earth, that just isn't there anymore, and finds out that he is pretty big deal in the eyes of some people that still are aware, and he has to decide upon the return of his arch nemesis whether or not he actually wants to be that guy that he once was, whether he still is that guy. And so it's kind of this re-origin story where he is expected to be something that he doesn't necessarily want to be.
Yeah, that's a great twist on the genre. I think that any of us that have written any kind of superhero novel, right, for the last few years, at least with superhero movies, they're going through a renaissance, and I think that I'm pretty, when I mention this theory to most people, some laugh and some say, oh yeah, maybe you're right. I think that this renaissance that superhero movies are having can be traced back to one man, and everybody always thinks that that's going to be Stan Lee, but it's not. I think it's Robert Downey Jr. I think that because of his inclusion in Iron Man, he brought to the seats audience members that wouldn't normally have been watching superhero movies. It's sort of like Norman Reedus, what he did to the zombie genre. And of course, what I'm speaking to is the female audience.
Right. It's the same thing with David Tennant bringing the female audience to Doctor Who.
Exactly. And
yeah, I would totally be on there. I think Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. did a great job of trying to make superhero movies more of an everyman type of movie. I remember back when The Phantom and movies like that came out back in the day, They were talking about how superhero movies were the next big thing, and it took like 20 years until they really were the big thing that they are today.
So now the big question is, as authors, the big question is where do we get our superstar? I mean, is it in the form of a is it going to be in the form of a Robert Downey Jr.-esque author, or would it be, is it going to take a superhero novel being turned into a movie starring someone like Robert Downey Jr.? Because I think that with the help of Robert Downey Jr., a lot of audience members also turn not just toward movies but to comics.
For sure. I have several friends who were self-proclaimed nerds that had never read a comic book until Marvel started becoming the powerhouse that it is today.
Yeah,
I can see that. As far as the question regarding, how superhero novels become the next big thing, I think it's an interesting field. Superheroes obviously have a long history of being in the graphic mediums, obviously being developed primarily through them. You look at, I don't know if you're familiar with The Supernaturalists, which I think is by Owen Colfer.
Hmm.
That book, when it became big, they actually made it into a graphic novel because superheroes, which I mean, that's kind of not exactly a superhero book, but it's kind of got a lot of the same themes. Because I think basically superheroes, when they see them, they're like, well, why don't we see them?
Right.
The words don't really work.
Right.
I don't know. I'm interested to see how the genre might develop. It's one of those genres that I'm surprised has never hit in any real way. I know when I was younger, I read a lot of novelizations of comic book or graphic novels or comic book series because I didn't have a good comic book shop that I went to or anything like that. But I've never seen it be the mainstream. And maybe it does just take some attractive author that really brings it in, or the 50 Shades of Grey of
Right.
superhero novels. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always find that superheroes and fantasy, although they're genres in and of themselves, they're very much related. And
I think they both come from the myths, the mythologies of
exactly.
the older cultures.
Well, you can even look at Thor. Thor is more I think more of a fantasy character than a superhero character, simply because he was a god.
Right, but I mean, you look at things like Lord of the Rings, and they also are very heavily based in those mythologies, those concepts, of Odysseus and
Right.
and his giant travels across the globe, trying basically just to get home.
Yeah, and at the same time, or on the same level, it wasn't until Peter Jackson decided to make those movies that the Lord of the Rings all of a sudden enjoyed a new renaissance. That because there have always been fans of those books, but they've just been kind of relegated to Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop games and stuff, and now all of a sudden it's mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody would ever say that the fantasy genre has suffered any form of weak period. I think they've been pretty strong since Tolkien really kind of developed the genre, but obviously Peter Jackson did a great job in making it more mainstream, for sure.
Right. And I think that maybe that's probably part and parcel to why, especially with indie authors in the superhero genre, is that we just need that that person to make the film. And what's interesting is that when people think of superheroes, they immediately go DC or Marvel. But if you go into a comic book shop, there are so many houses that produce comic books, and one of these days, I have a feeling that what's going to happen is, it'll start with independent comic books. Somebody will make a massively hit, superior movie out of an indie comic. That's not Spawn, if you remember that dreadful movie.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan. But, I was. Yeah, no. I remember getting into the hype, but I remember watching it and thinking that was. I don't know, he was in that same vein as Punisher and all those, where they're just really trying too hard to be relevant as opposed to telling great stories.
Exactly.
But I think you look at like Hellboy, which that's a great example of something that's not exactly a mainstream comic book series. That, I mean, you get the right director in there and the right story, and you can do something amazing and make a character like that actually matter. Yeah. Tank Girl back in the day.
Love it.
It had the right people making the right movie. It never got as big as Hellboy, obviously, but you see those situations where these smaller comic book characters really can do really well if they have the right people making those stories.
Right.
But I think to the point of the novel aspect of it, obviously it'd be great if somebody comes up and calls me and says, "Hey, I want to, option your book for a movie."
Right.
But I think the primary issue here is just getting people to read. Superheroes, or I mean, read in general. I think reading is not as big of a deal as it once was. Now that we have, I mean, we've got great stories being put on the screen. Between television and movies today, the past 20 years or so have been phenomenal for really finally trying to tell quality stories. Fantastic Four and all that can be ignored, but there are the exclusions to that, but there's also some amazing stuff just across the board that is coming out that I think is really making it hard to say, well, why should I read a book when I can, see Don Draper fall into madness on Mad Men, or see The
and,
Walking Dead.
and it's interesting that you say that, because I've been kind of professing that for a while now, that and you're one of the first, fellow authors that has kind of seen that. I think at the moment I wouldn't be surprised if there were more writers than there are readers.
I most of my readership are writers.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's pretty crazy how that goes, and I think part of the reason is and where I think indie authors really have an opportunity here is, I know for myself, I stopped reading for a very long time because I was reading stuff that was coming out of the big houses, the big publishing houses, and I got really tired of it. It was a
yeah,
lot of the same stuff over and
yeah.
over again. And I would read anything when I was
Right.
growing up. I
Mhm.
I got into the Babysitter's Club because my sister had those books, and
Mhm.
I'm like, well, I just need to read,
Right.
and I stopped.
Yeah.
And what brought me back is when I finally started writing for myself and started getting into the indie author
Yeah.
crowd. I started realizing that these indie authors have something to say.
Right.
Whereas, we got so stuck in the world of just writing the same stories over and over again,
Right.
and we're still seeing that today with the,
Yeah.
you get a trend and everybody has to hit it hard.
Exactly.
Um, I think indie authors really have the opportunity to make books relevant again,
I
as
agree.
opposed to making books the reboots
Right.
of
Right.
everything else.
Yeah. And we're not constrained with the standard rules of the big publishers.
Yeah.
Half, actually more than half of the books that I write, if I were to take those to the big publisher, they would say, well, where does this fit in the scheme of things? It kind of fits in the middle of everything. And I think that the indie authorship has been a boon to literature.
For
And
sure.
it's just like with the Legend of Buddy Hero and some of the other books in the indie super bundle. If those books wouldn't have ever occurred had in I think if indie publishing never came about, because they break the rules.
They'd be a
And
lot slower moving forward
yeah,
anyway. Things like Shiro, I don't think
yeah.
you would see
Oh
coming
no.
forward
Oh
in
gosh,
any
no.
speed.
And
Uh,
it's funny because they break the rules, they are unique and they are incredible.
well, they're telling a story that I think means something to somebody.
Exactly.
So like with the Legend of Buddy Hero, when I started writing that, I was in a place in my own life where I didn't know where I wanted to go, and I put that into my story.
Hmm.
Whereas you don't necessarily, I mean, obviously you look at Tony Stark, Iron Man,
Right.
and back in the day, that was a big part of his arc, was even
Sure.
though he had everything, he didn't know what to do, and he became
Right.
drunk and all that. And you don't see that really in the comic books. You see, or in the movies, you
Right.
get the little bits of it where it's like, oh, I went into space and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
But you don't, those big large arcs aren't happening like that anymore. You aren't getting into the characters that really uh, show you how these people relate to real people.
Right.
I think you get a lot of caricatures in literature today. The Fault in Our Stars, which I haven't read, from what I gathered, is really just, let's see how much you can cry, as
Right.
opposed to really
Right.
delving into who these characters are and how they become
Exactly.
what they are. You look at things like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. You have these female characters that are blank slates. They're nothing. They're
Right.
where indie literature, I'm seeing these actual strong female characters who
Exactly.
have something to say, who have something to do, who have a purpose for
Right.
existing other than to find a man to fulfill them. And I think that's one of the cool things about indie literature, is that you have those voices that are coming out that I think have been lost for a long period of time.
Oh, I agree. And I think that I think the landscape is going to continue shifting, and the big publishers are going to miss out completely.
Yeah.
And as we continue to break the rules and redefine genres, I have a feeling that the big publishers are going to start. I think that, and I'm surprised that it really hasn't happened yet, that where the indie authors or books that are published via indie authors are not being considered like the development league for the big publishers.
I
And
think I think some of them are,
some of them,
but I
yeah,
think they're more interested in the people who can develop that audience.
yeah,
So because I actually read something very interesting about the concept of how publishers work today. Whereas at one point they sent all their books off to a printer, and they
mhm,
were the marketing machine.
right,
Whereas then they bought the printers, and they became the printers, and now the
right,
authors are the marketing machines.
right,
I think there's the shift that's occurred with the digital revolution has made it really difficult for not just authors but also the publishers to know how everything needs to work today. And I
Right.
think you see Amazon really as the people who kind of are looking towards the future a bit more. You
Sure.
see how they're really putting the focus on the indie authors, partially because the big publishers want nothing to do with them,
Right.
but also because they're realizing that there is an opportunity to make money there.
Yeah.
And
And,
I mean,
and if you look at, like, if, for example, if you look at the small publishers, um, it's becoming harder and harder as an indie author to go, well, I'll submit to these small publishers, knowing that these small publishers are going to require you to do the things that you're already doing yourself.
the big publishers are doing that now too, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a big deal. I mean, it's not that much of a difference between the two.
Right.
There's obviously some marketing money that the big publishers have behind them, but it's not spent the way it used to.
No.
From what I've read, obviously I've stayed the indie course, so
Sure.
I can't say from personal experience. But,
Right. And I'm the book I'm writing right now. I'm considering submitting to small publishers, but in the back of my head, I keep saying, okay, what are they going to do for me that I'm not doing now, while they're taking a cut of my income?
Well, and even beyond the income thing, which I think for most indie authors is kind of a negligible
Right.
discussion. The control that you lose is a big
course,
deal.
of
You know,
course.
I have several friends that are through smaller publishers, and they can't give away books. They, you know, if they want to have a book, they have to buy a copy of their own book
Right.
to give to somebody. You know, and it's their document.
I
They
know.
don't own their covers
Yeah.
because the publisher produces it, and so the publishers, usually the smaller ones, have just a couple of year contract, from what I've gathered.
Yeah.
And so once that contract's up, if they determine that they don't want to re-up the contract, you have no cover for your
Right.
book.
Right.
Not to mention, I don't think that you have a lot of control over what gets produced for a cover. I think there's some, but
Yeah.
I mean, for myself personally, I really believe in what I write, and the idea of losing a lot of that control over how I can do what I want to do with that. I mean, because I'm not even getting into creative control, which
Sure. Oh,
is
yeah.
a touchy subject.
Kidding. Yeah.
I have a hard time. I've definitely tried submitting. I'm not going to pretend that I haven't tried
Right.
to go the traditional route, but in the end, I mean, at one point with Buddy Hero, I was talking with an agent who wanted to see it as a young adult novel, and it's not a young adult novel. I mean, it
Yeah.
steals a lot of themes from young adult novels,
Sure.
but it's not that story.
No.
And I guess those ideas of giving up that, I don't know, it's kind of the antithesis of what indie literature is, I guess. It's
Right.
one of the reasons why I see why we're in such turmoil
Yeah.
as a field.
Yeah, you know, like I said earlier, I had considered submitting Shiro a long time ago. I mean, I wrote that first book. Oh goodness, 2006, 2005 maybe.
Sure.
And at that time, you know, that was before the indie boom hit. And at that time, I kept thinking to myself, who am I going to submit this to? Who's going to want it? Because, you know, and especially back then, the GLBT scene, really all they wanted were books about, you know, men transitioning to women, or they wanted soft porn. And that's not what this book is. It's not at all. It's, you know, it's at its heart, it's a man who not only has to fight supervillains, but he has to fight society's opinion of him. And
Well, and to your point, I don't know if it's necessarily what the LGBT community, LBTG community
Right.
was looking for. I think that's what the publishers thought that
yes,
community was
you're
looking
right.
for.
You're right.
I think those more hard-hitting things where you actually see yourselves in the character is obviously what anybody's looking for.
Sure.
It's the same reason why you just throw in a black person into wherever you can, so
Right.
that you get the black community.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff I think is lost.
I agree. And you know, it's I don't know. I'm certainly not as proficient in the business end like say Dave Gaughran is. You know, he's always been kind of the champion for indie authors for years now.
Right.
And I don't have the time to invest into that kind of research. You know, all I do is write, and it's also another reason why I enjoy the indie publishing so much, is because it allows me to focus more on writing than it does anything else. And I've recently, you know, I recently had a family tragedy, and when I came out of that, I realized that I was spending so much energy trying to figure out how to, market in different ways that I was losing perspective. And I finally stepped out of it and said, you know what? I'm just going to make sure that the book I'm writing right now is better than the book I previously wrote.
And I think that's one of the cool things about being an indie author is that you have that opportunity. It's also one of the terrible things. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I think a lot of indie authors, a lot of authors in general, look toward the traditional publishing houses because they think that will allow them to focus on the writing more.
Right.
I mean, if you want to make money, marketing is going to be a part of it, or a severe amount of divine intervention, or whatever. Um, I think that's the way you have to go about it, though, is do what you want with the writing. Realize that the art should come first.
Of course,
the money,
I agree.
The money would be awesome.
Yeah, sure.
I think anytime that an author says they're not in it for the money is somewhat questionable.
Yeah,
but
they're lying.
But you can't be in it for the money because the money is not really there at this point.
Yeah,
not at the moment where everything's transitioning.
Right. And I was an actor for over 20 years, and then that's another field where you get into it because you have to.
Yeah, it's a creative field. I acted for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at it, but I acted for a long time.
I was really fortunate. I actually made my living for over 20 years as an actor, and I finally,
Impressive.
When I retired from it, right actually before I retired from it, I knew that I would have to have something to fill my artistic soul up. Otherwise, I would just wither away. And so that's when I wrote my first book. And I had the strange thing about it is that I never had any pretension to think that I was ever a writer. I was just an artist. And I just happened to come up with this idea for a book, and it took me a long time to write it, much longer than it takes me now. But when I finished with it, I remember thinking, wow, I just did something that most people can't do. Let's see if I can do it again.
Well, and if you're happy with it, that's always the impressive part.
Well, sure.
I think I've tried many different forms of creative expression, and there's only one that I've ever found myself like actually happy with the end result. There's ones where I'm like, oh, that wasn't as bad as it could have been. When I did a lot of acting, mostly in regional theater, I got paid very little over the years of it. But whenever I end up actually seeing something I did, it's like, oh no.
Oh yeah.
But when I go back and I read my books, through the editing process, actually go through and I'm like, that actually turned out really awesome. I don't know how that happened. I don't know if my readers think that, but at least when I come through and reread it, I'm really happy to know that I still like it, which I think is what an author looks for, is not necessarily complete perfection, because I don't think we ever believe that it's perfect, but going through and actually thinking, I did something pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I can go back and read my old stuff. And, because there's been 10 years between that and now, I can look at it and go, I probably would write this differently now, but it's still viable. And, there have been times I thought, well, let's go back and maybe rewrite some of the old stuff. But then I think, no, it was written at a specific time in a specific place in my life. And if I rewrite it, it won't be the same thing.
Well, and it's a dangerous road to go down. Sure. I think I go through and, I've got a couple of series right now that I'm working on, and so I go through and reread old stuff just to get back in the mindset.
Right.
And I make sure to clean things up here and there.
Yeah.
I think as far as making actual drastic changes to how the story works out, that's, well, Lucas tried it.
Yeah, we know how that turned out.
And I mean, he got more attention. People still talk about Greedo and Han.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
I think it's kind of dangerous, just not necessarily because of anything other than the fact that it is something that was created at a specific time. It had a specific meaning at that point, and it probably still has that meaning for other people, even if you've learned something since then.
Sure, of course. So, are you outside of Legend of Buddy Hero, are you still writing in the superhero genre?
Well, Buddy Hero is part of a series. It's kind of a loose series, not really like an epic saga, but right. So that's really my only superhero series that I'm working on right now. It's got a sequel out called The Rise of the Fat Mogul, which is about a new bad guy coming out. and kind of takes things a little bit further.
Sure.
So Buddy Hero was really about introducing what these tropes might be.
Sure.
Fat Mogul really, it takes on a bit more of a comedic tone at
Sure.
times, but also is a bit more epic in its scope. Where I
Sure.
think, Buddy, being my first novel, it was the first one I wrote, has a little bit of a simplistic background. Fat Mogul, I think, really takes that idea and makes an awesome sequel. Let's put it that way.
Oh, here's an interesting question. Something that I've dealt with. Shiro has 3 books right now, and I'll be writing. I usually only write Shiro when I need to take a break from all the seriousness because it's a lot of fun to write.
Right.
But I've written 3 of them so far, and when I start working on the new books, I always have to think, okay, what bad guy, what supervillains am I going to put in this that haven't been already played out? I mean, if you look at the whole canon of comic books, and pretty much everything's been covered.
Yeah, I looked through. I haven't read Mur Lafferty's Playing for Keeps yet, but I looked through some of her just superpower ideas, like in the basic concept there. I read through Super Villainous by Mike Leon, which are both in the Superbundle, and I was actually impressed by the creativity some of these people can come up with for powers. But I think the background story of the villain is always the most interesting to me.
Exactly.
So like whatever power you give them, you can make them as powerful or as weak as you want.
Right.
But what drives them is always the more interesting thing. And so, I mean, you get there, and you can go as lame as like Calendar Man.
Yeah.
Or as fully developed, even though the background's kind of questionable, like the Joker.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's always a story to tell if you can focus on that character. And so I'm not a huge fan of origin stories, which is why Buddy Hero is a origin story, which kind of avoids that.
Right.
But I think there's something to be said about that character development that does come with the origin stories, both for the villains and the good guys.
Right. Now it helps with Shiro because it's comedy.
Right.
So I can have Calendar Man,
right?
Or, whatever in there.
Calendar Man's gotten pretty serious recently. His recent stuff is pretty dark.
Yeah. But you just even if it's comedy, you still have to. I always try to make things as believable as possible within the scope of the world. So I don't usually go too crazy. But a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take an interesting human being that I've watched, when I go, people watching, and I'll imagine, a part of them, take a piece of them and explode it a bit and say, how would they be a superhero? And it's worked for Shiro quite a bit, but I don't know that it would work so well with more serious superhero fare, but it's a fantastic genre, and I think that there are going to be big things coming out of it. I'm surprised. It was funny when I started to curate the Superbundle. I started reaching out. Well, actually, the first thing I did was I got onto Amazon and I started looking at superhero novels, and I was shocked at how few there were.
It's not a huge genre.
No, it's
probably because it doesn't sell.
Right. Yeah, but that's the hard truth about it. But the thing is once I started finding the novels that I felt were worthy of inclusion, I found that they were very incredibly well written, and the stories were deep and the characters were rich. I was you go in there and you think, okay, please, author, have more. And some of these series have just started. Some of them were written quite a while ago, and they're just, the author never continued the series, or they're just kind of slow on it. But
it's one of the falters of reading indie literature that has a series base to it. It might not end.
I know.
But yeah, I get where you're going. There's a lot of it there, and a lot of great stuff. Superhero genre. I remember when I was first trying to come up with a way of selling it, trying to just determine what genre it fit in, because there's not really a superhero genre per se.
Right.
And I started realizing that it's one of the few genres that really straddles sci-fi and fantasy.
It does.
Which I think is really cool. I think that allows for a lot more craziness. So you can have anything happen. I mean,
Exactly.
in those two genres in the first place are very close knit, but
Right.
when you deal with how superheroes can really kind of just explode that even more, and I think that's one of the cool things. You look at the stories that are out there, and they're very far reaching. I read one, Henchman by Eric Lottie,
Yeah.
not too long ago, which it's similar in idea to the supervillainous in the bundle, but it's about the henchman, so the sidekick to the bad guy, and about how he became why he wanted to be a henchman, basically.
Right.
Was it just the benefits, or
Yeah.
was there something more? And it really dug deeply into the brain of the guys that usually don't even have a name, which I think is really cool. There's another one where it's about this guy who is in Hell's Super by Mark Cain, which basically, I mean, it wasn't exactly a superhero story, but he had a superpower of super duct taping things,
Right.
and
Right.
and it was this concept of what would it be like to be the guy who tries to fix everything in hell,
Yeah.
because he was the superintendent, was where the super came in.
Sure.
And so I mean these things just they're far reaching, as far as what all they can encapsulate, and I think that's what's really cool about the genre, and about what's really cool with what's capable of the genre, where I don't think we're seeing that necessarily in the mainstream literature today. I think it's really, well, it's either Marvel or it's not. If you talk to most people,
Right.
you say,
Right.
well, that Man of Steel movie got a little dark, and
Right.
they didn't even
Yeah.
care. Which
You know.
I liked Man of Steel, because you
Yeah.
actually saw some character development. You saw some
Exactly.
pain.
Yeah.
You saw more than just goofy jokes and testosterone beating on each other, which is very exciting. I
Right.
thought Avengers was a great film.
Sure.
But I think it's also great to see a little gravitas into
Exactly.
the
And I
characters.
think that's one thing like this the CW has going for it with
For sure.
the Flash and Arrow. You're
Flash got
actually
a little frightening at the beginning there, because they were
yeah.
really into the Iris Berry thing, and then Arrow at the
Right.
end here got really into the
I know.
Felicity, I
I
think.
know. I know. But
But there's some great stuff going on in
there
there.
is, and it's the great stuff is when they really delve into the characters and the relationships, and it's I think that you see an incredible dichotomy between the CW and everything that Marvel's putting out,
Yeah.
and it's and then there's Gotham,
Which I
which
love.
I do too. And there's I can't even remember the name of it, but CW has another new series coming out.
The Legends of Tomorrow, I think.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
one with the Atom and Captain Cold, and
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
So
that one looks really good. Anytime you bring Rip Hunter into things, though,
right,
it's,
and so hopefully a network like the CW can actually help us because people can. They watch these shows and they say, hey, wait a minute, there's more to superheroes than just Bamf and Kapow.
well, and what I like about them, and you started seeing this with Marvel, but I think they're still a little afraid of it. But you're starting to see the actual tights come into play.
Yeah, yeah,
There's that Smallville aspect that I still think is still around most superhero entertainment, which
yeah,
they were developed with the idea of no flight and no tights.
right,
They didn't want to see the superhero in the superhero origin story,
right,
and I think we're starting to, and I think the CW's shows right now are really getting in there, where they're starting to be okay with seeing the superhero come into play. The Flash is in the Flash's uniform. Green Arrow is in his uniform now. It's took him a while.
right,
You see the Atom in this goofy Iron Man thing,
right.
which I hated at first, but I'm realizing it's kind of a dig at what Iron Man really should be,
Exactly.
which I kind of like. And so I think we're starting to see with the CW especially that we're not going to be as afraid of these stories that have worked for over like 75 years now,
Yeah, exactly.
since Superman came around. I think he's
Right.
76 this year. These are the stories that have worked, the costumes that have worked. It's something that has worked, and we've been so afraid of it as a entertainment building culture.
Right.
But I think the CW is showing that we might be changing.
Yeah.
Maybe. We also got Guardians of the Galaxy, which is way out there, and
Right.
it worked. So that helped a
did,
lot of
yeah.
people feel a little bit more comfortable.
So let's close off. I want you to tell everybody where they can find you and what they should expect from you.
Yeah. Well, I am on Facebook, Twitter, and you can find me at fatmogul.com. Fatmogul. I can't speak all of a sudden. I'm promoting myself. Fatmogul.com, which is FATMOGUL.com. And you can get links to Facebook and everything there.
Right.
I've got a sequel to I've got a book called The Agora Files, which is out right now, which is this dystopian running adventure thing where there's all sorts of espionage type themes going on. I've got the sequel to that I'm hoping to get out here in the next month or so. It's been a little slow with life, but that's how it works when you're doing it on the side.
Exactly.
And then I've got some cool stuff coming up that I'm really excited to do or to get moving forward on. I've got a book that I'm in editing for about a guy who decides to secede from the United States, basically. And so it's kind of political, but really just this idea of what would it be like to start a new country.
Sure, that sounds cool. So what's your favorite genre to write in?
Whatever I'm writing at the moment.
Right.
I like to call myself an adventure novelist just because most of my stuff has been kind of adventure based, where somebody's being introduced to this brand new or grand new, I don't know, pioneering spirit thing. But yeah, I have a lot of different varying things I like to write. Right now, I just finished a murder mystery script for the local theater that they're producing, so it's a little bit more goofy and whatever.
Yeah.
I've got an anthology. I suppose I should promote that. An anthology called Dread or Gifts from the Dark. An anthology of Dread, which is coming out, I think, in October. That I've got a story in. So yeah, I mean, I'm really all over the board, which is, I think, one of the dangers of being an indie author is you're not forced to stay in one genre, which probably makes it a little bit harder for readers to do. But you're allowed to follow your heart and follow the muse a little more.
Yeah, I have a young adult book out that I'm hopefully going to write a sequel to, and some people, when I released it, they were like, "Are you going to promote it on the same places you promote all your horror?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's a dark young adult book, and if they're mature enough to read that, then they're mature enough to read my other stuff. I mean, it's not like I'm promoting, picture books,
right,
along with zombie books. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, along with all of that freedom comes a little bit of responsibility that we've got to be, and as long as we're honest and truthful to ourselves, I think we're okay.
And I think it's possible to cross over and promote them the same. There are authors that have done that very well over the years. Neil Gaiman obviously being a great example of somebody who's able to do fantastic adult literature as well as fantastic children's literature.
Right. And Clive Barker's done it too.
Right, Clive's done it, and there's a lot of them out there, and just in the mainstream.
Sure.
But I think it's a little bit more difficult of a road to tread as the burgeoning indie author than as the person that everybody already knows the name of.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I think Gaiman and Barker could do pretty much whatever they want, and people would buy it. So
it does help, yeah.
Yeah, it does. So fatmogul.com.
That's me.
You'll find Adam Oster and check out his story, The Legend of Buddy Jackson, or Legend of Buddy Hero, story of Buddy Jackson, in the Storybundle Indie Bundle, Superbundle.
Yeah, find it there with some other great books. I'm making it through them right now, and they're pretty awesome. Shiro, I'm a quarter of the way through. Been digging what's going on. Curious about what's going on, but
it's a strange little book. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll get this out as soon as possible, and so the world can behold your greatness.
I will expect sales to drop precipitously. So.
Well, it's kind of a curse that comes along with being associated with me. Anyway, thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
I look forward to reading more of your work.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.